You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode number 89, we'll be discussing the latest news to hit the Overwatch League. We'll see how these new roster moves are going to look ahead of some major changes for Stage 4. Of course, we got Stage 4 to preview with the 2-2-2 lock in all. And not just that, Spider, but of course we actually got some details for the 2020 season, and that will be for our main discussion for tonight. But what a whirlwind of a week it has been across all of Overwatch this past week. We had the totally expected worst kept secret in all of competitive Overwatch with 2-2-2, which was supposed to get announced on Watchpoint on Tuesday, which actually... it was supposed to happen on, Wednesday or Thursday, and then it dropped, a day early, and then the new hero got leaked, and then there's been a ton of announcements about Sigma, and there's the origin story. There's a lot to take in since our last recording, but amongst all of the chaos, how has this past week been treating you?
I don't know, man. It's been pretty quiet. There's nothing to get excited about. There's nothing going on my side. I'm just sitting here boy, I wish there was something we could talk about for 2 hours. But like you said, there might be a few things like role lock, a new hero, which we probably won't talk too much about tonight. We'll probably get into him maybe next time when we know a little more about him. And the whole watch point shenanigans, dropping it early and going through all that. We found out more about Rollock through leaks than we might have through actual blogs. That was almost to the point where it ended up. But it's an exciting week. I mean, beyond all that other stuff, say none of that happened, we're going into the start of Stage 4, which is the last stage of Season 2, which is exciting. We get to see where teams are going to fall, and now there's this new piece of the puzzle that we have to decrypt and decipher, and hopefully, Sombra can help us, or maybe we'll need an astrophysicist or two, depending on which personality or who you're talking to. But man, it's going to be a fun night. So what about you, man? How has all this news been hitting you? Because you got to write 6 shows for this stuff, so I know you've got to be eating it up.
Well, you know what was funny? Ed and I were joking about, hey, this past Wednesday we were going to be talking for 3 hours. And we hit record, and it was 2 hours and 56 minutes. Now, I didn't find out about the Watchpoint leak happening during our recording until after the fact. Because, I saw someone tweeting it, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I'm sure, had I noticed that, there would have been about 5 minutes of just uncontrollable laughter, because I could not keep myself together when I saw it. And, like a lot of people out there, as soon as I saw it, I watched the whole thing. And lo and behold, it was exactly what we were expecting. The 2-2 luck is coming. And, we all knew it was going to happen, so I can't say, well, I wonder what this could be. But it wasn't anything additive outside of what information we already knew. But I've been enjoying the week. It's been pretty crazy. A lot to talk about across the board. A lot of things to be excited about. And I'm looking forward to seeing whatever Sigma's toolkit is going to be. And whether or not he is going to be a tank or the perfect pair-in for Wrecking Ball, because there's a lot of accusations, a lot of theories floating around right now, but I really love the duality of the origin story, and I have to say, by far the creepiest, atmosphere in regards to the backstory for a character that we've seen so far.
Yeah, it was much darker than we've really seen to this point. I mean, even the Talon stuff has been muscle mustache twirling type of evil. It hasn't been like the thriller, like psycho thriller that you can have. So I think this is a really neat turn for them. It's really unexpected, and it might give us like our I don't want to say our first true villain, but like our first like non-sympathetic villain, because there really isn't a character in the game, maybe outside of Moira, that you're not like, oh man, they're evil. Like I really don't want them to get their way. Like Reaper's had it like a bad pass, like Doomfist, you can kind of get behind him, like the whole fight to get stronger type of thing. But this guy, like he seems like he is just evil at this point. Like he's been a test subject or something, and at this point he just wants to see things just die, which is edgy but cool. So we'll see where it goes from here.
So yeah, while there are a lot of experiments being done to Sigma off at whatever base he's currently at, whether it's a mental ward or not, we don't know yet, but there's a lot of experimentation that's going to go into Stage 4 of the Overwatch League amongst all of the changes. Not only do we have the role lock happening, we also had a slew of different roster moves happening, which were finally announced after, it's been like 2 weeks beyond the Stage 4 lock at this point for the rosters. So we finally got something to talk about in regards to the moves outside of some of the recent sign-ins for, Washington Justice having picked up the Team Envy tank duo, who now have actually picked up the British Hurricane tank duo and lost the map against Triumph, so they are no longer a perfect stage in regards to not dropping a single map. But let's talk about all of the shifts that we have seen in the Overwatch League, at least since our last recording. So first up, looking at the Seoul Dynasty, they've actually moved one of their players to the inactive roster, that being their DPS player, Munchkin, who is going to be taking an indefinite break from Overwatch and is going to be out for the remainder of the season. So due to this, he's going to be moved over to the inactive roster. And this news basically comes following Munchkin not making an appearance in the Stage 3 playoffs with the Seoul Dynasty. And basically right now it leaves them with 2 DPS. So moving forward in Stage 4, we are going to have the Fleta and Fitz DPS duo, which definitely seem to be the more flexible options out of, whatever number of combinations we could have had on this team. But what do you think that's going to mean for this DPS line looking forward? Is there a distinct style that you assume that Dynasty is going to come out with come Stage 4 due to this?
Not really. I mean, they do still have Illicit, so he is technically listed on the roster as a DPS, so they do have that. But I 100% agree with you. I think it's going to be Fleta, and Fitz. And I honestly, with as flexible as Fleta is, I mean, Fleta is the meta, is going to come back. He can play Widow, he can play Pharah, we're going to see a lot of different looks. It's just going to be up to Fitz to fill in. So if Fleta can play the Widow, we're going to see Fitz on Hanzo. If Fleta's going to play the Pharah, we're going to see Fitz on whatever they choose to complement that, whether it's going to be Tracer or Genji. It really depends on what Fleta is going to play is what Fitz is going to play. I don't think we're going to see Illicit too much, unless there's like some map specific comps or maybe a specific hero he's really good at. But like I went back and kind of looked up his pool, and it really doesn't outpace Fleta anywhere. Like he had a lot of overlap with Fleta there. So outside of that, it's sad to see like another OG from the Seoul Dynasty go, because Munchkin kind of came in season 1 and replaced Bunny, and then Bunny went through his whole process, and Munchkin was their traces specialist, and he looked really good. Like obviously he was good enough to replace Bunny, but this season he kind of looked lackluster. He never really quite lived up to what we saw in season 1, which has kind of been the story for season 2 at this point. Is a lot of the players from season 1 just due to the meta just didn't get a chance to shine. So, and we'll see what goes on. I do know that Munchkin had some health issues in the past. I think it was something with his wrist. So that could have flared back up, and he was kind of like, with this and everything that's going on, maybe it's just time that I stepped away, because they did say it was mutual. So It's sad to see Seoul lose a capable DPS player at the point where we're actually going to start seeing DPS again. But if this is for his health, if this is what he wanted to do, then it's the right choice to make.
Right, and I do quickly want to note you did bring up Bunny, and I do have an update on where Bunny's whereabouts are, and he's actually signed with Team CC to compete for the Shanghai Dragons Academy team over in Contenders China, so he did find a new home after making his escape from the Overwatch League. But that being said, Dynasty were not the only ones having to make a roster adjustment, as the Charge were actually pretty busy. Not only did they go out and acquire someone, spend a little bit of cash, they also were involved in a trade. But first, let's talk about their off-tank sign-in. So, Guangzhou Charge, they went out and, they've looked to bolster their tank line by signing off-tank Bishu. So, looking back, Bishu was definitely one of the critical members of the LA Gladiators during the inaugural season, but in Season 2 this year, his stage time has dropped pretty extensively, as the Gladiators have primarily been running Void in that slot. And of course, there was a time where, Bishu himself was also going through a couple of health issues, and he ended up signing a two-way contract in order to compete with Gladiators Legion, which of course is the academy team for the LA Gladiators. So he was still actively playing, so he was still able to get some reps in and, helping in-house as well. He was still, staying with the team and everything throughout his Contenders stint. Now, looking at the Guangzhou Charge, of course, they also do have an off-tank in Hotba, and a lot of the talk recently, at least with this particular sign-in, is the fact that, on one hand, you're basically bringing in not one but two veteran tank players. We'll have more on that in, just a minute here. But you're also bringing in someone who is primarily known as an off-tank player. Now, that's not to take anything away from Hotba. Hotba is a competent player. Like, I don't know if he's above average on off-tank specifically, but with Hotba, you definitely have a lot of flexibility with him as a player. But we're moving into a 2-2-2 lock, so how much do you feel like that impacts Hotba's playability at this point, knowing that he's not going to be able to flex as much?
I think that hurts him a lot. I think when Rollock was first announced, there was a few questions that were being asked, like, who does this help the most? Who does this hurt the most? And Hoppa was definitely on my list for players that this hurts the most. Other players like Kib, who we'll talk about it a little bit. I think this hurts a little bit because they're going to be shoehorned into a specific role and stuff like that. So it does hurt those players. And I think that's kind of why they picked up Bishu, is Bishu was always a really good off-tank. And he's been known to flex around into other off tanks besides D.Va. Like, obviously, last year in the dive meta, we saw a lot of D.Va. So that, we'll see him on D.Va, but he can also flex to the Hog. He's a pretty good all-around off tank. But what Bishu brings is actually more like off the stage presence. Like, if you've ever seen any interviews with Bishu or any of the gladiators talking about Bishu, you see that he's definitely like one of those team leader types. Like, he is the kind of guy that you want on your team because he can rally your team. He can do various jobs for the team, maybe short of drive the bus, but he will translate, he will boost morale, like he will coach. And it seems like that's what Guangzhou needs, especially with the trade we're going to talk about next, because they're going to need someone that's really going to translate if they really plan on playing who they picked up for main tank. Yes, Trishfoot says it in the chat. Like, he is the glue guy. There's actually a really good article on this, and he is the kind of guy every team wants to have. Like, you take him, and he may not be a star. He may not be popping off as Carpe or Fleta or any of those, but he is that guy that is consistently there. He is consistently performing well, and he is consistently making sure that your team is at least happy enough to try to perform well. And teams that don't have that, you will see will have lots of problems, like the Dallas Fuel did last year, and possibly this year. So I think this was a great pickup for the Charge because they've kind of lacked that. Like, they've had the star pop-off potential with like Happy, but they've never really had like that one person that they're always like, boy, I can't believe we have so and so on our team. He's such a great guy. Like, he helps us out. So this was actually really good because I was really sad when Bishu was relegated to contenders after his health issues, because he is such a good player and such a great teammate. So this is a great pickup for the Charge.
It's also worth noting that when you look at the rosters across the Overwatch League, Guangzhou Charge does have the youngest roster in regards to like average age. So they need that sort of like veteran leadership on this team, and Bishu is a perfect guy for that job, and so is the next move that they made, because Guangzhou Charge, they went out and they had a trade sign with the Philadelphia Fusion. So again, we have a tank player coming over for the Charge. In this case, they had picked up Fraggy from the Philadelphia Fusion in exchange for DPS player Kib. So Kib is going over to the Fusion. And, when you look at the DPS line for the Fusion, obviously the cornerstone of that team is primarily that DPS duo of Carpe and EQO, who were definitely like one of the top DPS lines throughout all of Season 1. Now, when you look at the Charge, of course, they have Rio, who is currently their main tank. Fraggy had basically just been perma-benched on the Fusion after he started a bulk of Season 1. Really never got an opportunity to play after that, as they continued to run Sato at that point as soon as Sato's suspension was up after his 30-game suspension from being the kingpin booster, so to speak. But anyways, a lot of the discussion around Fraggy throughout all of the season, amongst like the Philadelphia Fusion struggles at times, especially in the tank heavy meta, was hashtag free Fraggy. Now, there's still a lot to be said. Like, obviously, this is a very young team, and there are times when it creates some very flashy moments, but there's also times where that creates a little bit of chaos and over-eagerness when it comes to committing in these fights, and there's definitely been a handful of occasions where they end up pushing too far, and experience is definitely a huge thing for this team, something that they do lack. And now they bring in Fraggy, they bring in someone like Bishu, and I feel like these signings are more so just trying to keep people more in line and just having that veteran composure to try to bring to this team across the board. So I don't know if we're going to enter a situation where we're going to see split time between Fraggy and Rio, but I'm glad that this is something that, looking at like long term, these are two players in particular that the Charge have acquired who can very easily transition into staff members should that happen, and help guide these younger players and take them under their wing. So I'm really anxious to see how this is going to pan out for the Guangzhou Charge moving forward. And I know, like, the Kib one is definitely interesting because, we might see a little bit of a unique approach with him in particular for Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, Kib is, at this point, you can't think that Philadelphia is going to bench EQO or Carpe unless there's some very specific problem that we don't know about. So Kib is going to be the Roadhog main. Like, Kib is going to be playing Roadhog because he is a phenomenal Roadhog. Unfortunately, that kind of shows their hand a little bit when he's in. But thankfully, as strong as Orisa Hog is right now, that's not really a problem. I mean, when Gesture was playing Winston, and they were like, he's gonna play Winston every map. Mm-hmm. Still worked. I mean, they won the finals. So, as far as Fraggy goes, like, hashtag Fraggy's free. I mean, come on, we at least got that, and I think this will be good for the Charge because, Rio has looked good, but mostly mediocre. Like, when you look at him as a whole, he's kind of like middle of the pack tank. So Fraggy could bring a little bit of that pizzazz, as you were talking about.
Like, hit him with the old razzle dazzle.
Hit him with the razzle dazzle. So it may work, it may not. Like you said, it can go either way, and it can go south very quickly the way Fraggy plays. But I think Fraggy and Bishu together will be a good tank unit because they'll easily communicate. Bishu can translate to any members of the team. And that's not to say that Rio and Bishu won't work either, because that is also another option. Basically, what this does for the Charge is this just gives them a lot of options. So I think going forward, we may see Rio play maybe like Winston base maps, Hammond base maps, and then Fraggy may come in as like the Reinhardt Orisa specialist because Fraggy has, as far as we know, he's probably been practicing Orisa because that is the one thing the Charge have kind of lacked at this point. So you have to think that as soon as he got to the Charge, they were probably like, all right, you need to be on Orisa because we're going to see a lot of her this stage. And I kind of said my piece on Kib. Like Kib's going to be a Roadhog bot if we see him. If not, he's just going to be a bench DPS unless there's something major we don't know going on behind the scenes at Philadelphia, which is not 100% possible, but I can't comment on that. Nobody knows.
Yeah, it's more of a like Seven Lions mini reunion going on with the Philadelphia Fusion at this point between Boombox, Christopher, Hayes is also from the UK, and now you got Kib, so they do have that going for them. So again, you have the Fusion being more of a UK team more so than, or even more of an EU team compared to London, of course, who are still all Korean at this point. But
Dallas is more of a UK team than
a lot.
Come on.
A lot. I mean, really, like any team that just has one individual from the UK is more of an EU team.
We should say EU. I mean, because UK is pretty specific.
Well, yeah, it's specific to Philadelphia Fusion.
Right, there you go.
In this case. But anyway, so moving on, we also have a shift from the LA Valiant over to the Shanghai Dragons. So Valiant continuing to offload their Korean players, and they sent Izayaki to the Stage 3 champions of the Shanghai Dragons. Now, this one is interesting. This is one I'm still actually trying to process. So, looking back, Izayaki had first joined the Valiant back in April, kind of as, like, their last official sign-in when they were, like, at, like, the max at this point. So, despite not starting with the team in 2018, he basically came in this season as their flex support. And, of course, like, this was at a time when Kareev was kind of, like, filling in whatever. He was basically, like, playing DPS for the Valiant at this point. And, we kind of got a little bit further into the season, and Kareev and Izayaki started to split some time there, with eventually, Kareev ended up getting the start-in nod over Izayaki, who did not see play time after Stage 2 for the Valiant. Now, on Shanghai, he's going to be the second flex support outside of Luffy. And right now, like, this is a 10-man roster at this point. It also brings the Valiant down to 8 players, so, they've kind of, like, trimmed the fat a little bit, and we'll see how they're going to do moving forward. But that's definitely a team that has been on an upward trajectory after their Stage 3 performance. But I know there's been a lot of confusion about this particular sign-in from a Dragon's perspective. So is there something that you've seen either from Izayaki or maybe from Luffy, specifically like on his Zenyatta performance, that makes you more confident in this move? Because I know a lot of people are kind of like, okay, it's just like a little bit extra strength, but they don't see the point of this sign-in in particular.
No, I think with Luffy kind of leveling up as we've seen through Stage 3, he's getting a lot more confident. His Zenyatta is definitely weaker than his Ana, but going forward with the Rollock, I don't expect to see Zenyatta any more than we've seen Ana. Like, I actually think Ana's play will go up. So to me, what this signing says is, first of all, I called it like weeks ago. I said Izayaki's the next one to go. I didn't expect the Dragons. Like, that did take me by surprise. But to me, what this says is this is the Dragons saying, okay, we won a stage, final. We're finally firing on all cylinders. It's time to start looking forward. It's time to start cultivating talent. It's time to really start looking for somebody that we can train, get into the team culture. And that way, if we need to trade Luffy or something happens, like Luffy needs to go, who knows? As a sports team, you should always prepare for the future if you can. That's what this says to me. Izayaki is a very promising young player. He has some very interesting positioning issues, but he is highly talented, and he will fit very well into the Dragons roster. So I think this just says to me that they're going to really start coaching him and training him to be a future Dragons player. Like, I don't foresee him going anywhere outside of the Dragons unless somebody makes a really ridiculous offer. So I don't think it's like I don't see him replacing Luffy unless something strange is going on. Which after you win a state championship, teams are pretty happy. So I don't foresee any drama behind the scenes. Like this to me basically said Izayaki wanted out of the Valiant at this point because Valiant has basically been jettisoning all their Korean players. And Shanghai was like, cool, we'll take him. Like, they made an offer on him, probably pretty decent, but still fairly cheap because, he wanted to leave. And, there's that whole Immortals thing and stuff like that going on right now. So who knows what their financial situation is. But it was just the Dragons saying we need a backup player. Izayaki's really talented. We're going to cultivate him, and we're going to move forward with that. So I wouldn't pin this on like they're replacing Luffy. Luffy to me has been a very decent support, and he kind of surpassed that in stage 3 to a very good support. And then in the playoffs, he became an amazing support because there were like Ananades, like sleep darts and stuff that he was nailing that kind of harkened back to like peak Ryuji Hong days. So I think Luffy's job is safe at the moment. I think this is just a shoring up the roster type of thing.
Yeah, no, protection that backline has gotten has definitely allowed him to have more opportunities to kind of like break through at this point. But looking ahead at Stage 4, which starts this week, there's a lot to talk about here in regards to what's new in Stage 4. So as we mentioned earlier in the show, of course, we have the reintroduction of the role lock, aka the 2-2-2. So every game that you see moving forward will have team compositions consisting of 2 damage heroes, 2 tank players, and 2 support players. So, of course, not only are we getting it in the Overwatch League, but it will soon be coming to the game. As a matter of fact, we have the role lock, the role queue on the public test ROM right now. So if you guys want to go check it out, go update the PTR, hop in, do placements. You are able to queue for multiple roles, so, there is that as well. And, with this, they're basically making some changes to the seeding order on stage. So it's going to be based on their role. So when you're looking left to right on stage, you'll have the 2 damage players, and then the 2 tank players, and then the 2 support players on the far right. And now, should there be any sort of role change between the players, they will have to move seats. And I know, like, the whole seeding thing is confusing a lot of people. Basically, like, everyone has, like, an ID. Like, it's very easy for someone to switch seats or computers if they need to. And there are actually some teams out there who have actually been sitting in this particular order throughout the entirety of the season already. So that's looking at teams like the Guangzhou Charge, Philadelphia Fusion, the San Francisco Shock, and the Paris Eternal. I know, like, someone had done, like, percentages, and I know all of them were above 75% usage. Charge have done it throughout the entirety of this current season. But outside of that, there were other teams that had been kind of, like, going through this as well, like the Spark, Dynasty, Gladiators, Defiant, as well as the Dragons. Now, looking at the 2-2-2 in particular, they had informed the teams of the change back in early June in order to give them the max time to prepare ahead. And of course, with all the recent sign-ins, there are definitely more were more of a key, like, indicator of the 2-2-2 coming, even though, like, we all figured that would be the case. But what's interesting about this is, we got a couple of snippets about the future of Overwatch League. So we have the season playoffs coming up, starting on August 30th. And that's going to be played on a new patch, which does include balance changes. And that's going to be the patch that is currently on the PTR. Now, Spider, I'm just curious, do you feel like, with that being said, of course we're expecting the new hero to drop and be put on the PTR. Do you expect to see Sigma playable during the season playoffs this year?
That's a tough one. I would probably say no, just based off of timing. But it's possible. They could just go all out and say balls to the wall, whatever, play him. And even if they did that, like, all right, I guess my official answer is probably not, but maybe. But even if they say they went, like I said, full balls to the wall, like everything on the PTR is playable, most teams probably wouldn't run him right away, because A, it is playoffs and you haven't had that much practice on him, and B, you haven't had that much practice on him.
Right.
So, you know, for that reason, I would probably say they would, just because they're not thinking, and it would be cool to see like a team pull him out and then like turn a point, or take a whatever, take 2 points on Anubis by surprise, or whatever happens. So I think it would be cool, but I don't know, like Blizzard's made some interesting choices with this 2-2-2 lock. Like you said, like teams have known about this since June. Like this is really interesting to me, and they talk about it in various places. But one of the things that really surprised me is they said, going into this, they had all the teams vote when they wanted 2-2-2, and they gave them like options, and the teams were like, just do it now. And the funny part was, even the teams that were doing good at goats were like, yeah, just do it now. So even the teams realized that, like, as dominant as goats was, it wasn't good for the game. Like, it wasn't good for these DPS players that are making hundreds of $50,000, that are stuck on like a tank role. Put them back on DPS, what they were paid to do. So I think Rollock's a great thing for the game. Like, we've talked to it to death, so I'm not going to talk about the general advantages to Rollock. I think it's great for the core game, and I think the pro scene has to mirror the core game, so it's only natural that it's going to go to the pro scene.
Yeah, and I can just imagine when they were talking to the teams about the introduction of Rollock, that all of the attention was just directed at the DPS players, and everyone else was just looking at them for their input. And all of them would have just been like, yeah, we need this as soon as humanly possible, because if we don't, no one is going to want to play the game. At that point. So I do not think Sigma will be part of the season playoffs. I feel like it's a pretty safe bet to say that Sigma will come with the Overwatch World Cup, which of course will be after the season playoffs, closer towards BlizzCon, so I would expect to see him then. Not so much come August 30th for the season playoffs, but who knows? Really, all bets are off at this point, but I do feel like it would be too high risk, especially when there is more on the line once we get to the season playoffs. Now, looking ahead at what matches of the week we have throughout Stage 4, this Sunday we have the Shanghai Dragons going up against the Seoul Dynasty. For Week 2, we have Atlanta Reign going up against the Houston Outlaws. Week 3, we have Fusion facing the Titans. 4, we have Spitfire versus Reign, and then 5, we have the Battle of LA during the LA Valiant homestand, or the Kit Kat rivalry, whatever the heck they're called it. It's like 80 different titles at this point. I don't know what they're going to go by next week. It might be something completely different, but that is the final one for this stage. So we got some pretty interesting matches there, but something that I'm looking forward to, and this is something that's been kind of like sprinkled in here and there, is they're actually turning these 1v1 duels into a series throughout the stage. So these are going to be happening weekly during the Watchpoint pre-show. We don't know what specific matches we are going to be getting yet, but all of those matchups will be revealed on Twitter. So, now of course we had like the OGE Mickey Doomfist battle. Hopefully we're not going to see Bren in these. Hopefully these are just pro player versus pro player, because there's going to be a lot more on the line there. Is there anything in particular that you're wanting to see from the duel series this stage?
I mean, Carpe versus Diem and Widow would be one of them. There are a lot of Widow duels that I'd like to see. But like EQO versus Libero on Hanzo would be pretty cool. There's always Gods versus Mangachu on Torbjorn to see if he can defend the Torb Hammer. There's a lot of options out there. Like, heck, you can even put like Poco versus Gods in Diva and see how they do in like a Diva fight. There's so many options that they have. You can put like Bumper versus, I don't know, we'll just say Jake in a like free for all pick'em, like what is it? 1v1 lockdown.
I thought you were
where
going to
had
go
to-
with, like, dogmen in regards to who can feed more.
No. That's a whole different 1v1. We're keeping track of that off scenes. But no, like what is it? What is it like the lockdown where you get to pick the 3 and then you can't choose or whatever? Something like that, or 1v1. Like they don't have to stick to one hero. Is I guess the point I'm saying is like they have so many options that they could do, and I'd actually like to see them expand this to like 3v3s and stuff like that too, to see what they can do. So there's a lot of fun options that they can have, and this will give time because teams can always send out players. Specifically for like the 3v3s are maybe like widow 1v1s where we'll see like flower or something, like players who don't get a lot of time, like Pine or stuff like that, like fan favorite players. This is a way to get them back on stage and generate a little more hype around it. So I am glad that they're bringing this back. And the one thing I really want to see, and I wanted to save this for last because this is like the most out there, but I want to see players play heroes that they don't typically play. Like I'd like to see like Jonak versus like Neptuno on like McCree or stuff like that. Like, but take them, like you can have your in the element like matches every so often, but I'd like to see players like flex out of their roles and see how they do there, because I think that would be more fun, because you're not going to be like, oh yeah, this is going to be an amazing Widow duel between Carpe and Diem, this is totally what we expect. Whereas you don't know what you're going into it. It's kind of like the OG versus Mickey Doomfist battle. You're like, okay, this could definitely go like either way, because we've never seen either of these players actually play Doomfist on the stage. So I'm glad that they're making this an official thing, because it was one of my favorite things for Stage 3. So good on them for picking up the crowd energy and just, running with it.
Right, and looking at our Twitch chat real quick, Trenchfoot is wanting to see Dean versus Jinmu in a fair battle. And Owlkiss is asking, what do you think about bringing popular streamers in to go against a pro player? Like Iman might grow the viewer base. That's actually a really interesting point. So obviously we've already seen, like, Bren going up against the pro players. And obviously there's, I'm not gonna say animosity about that, but there's a lot of hype kind of like around social media that gets a buzz going for that. So like I don't think you necessarily would have anything to lose by putting a popular streamer if they're already doing it against like one of their figureheads, so to speak.
Right.
And there are definitely a lot of good options there in regards to the streamers as well. Like I would definitely be up for that as another option too.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine like Pine versus Calvin? Not that I think Calvin would actually do it, but Pine versus Calvin in like a McCree battle, like that would generate crap ton of viewers right there. Like you would get 90,000 people watching that easily.
Again, it's not like Blizzard isn't known to like fly people out to Blizzard HQ for streaming. Heck, we just saw Siegel sitting down with our Devin Safer, Papa Jeffy Cap, praise him. Talking about roll queue here within the last week as well. And of course, I don't know how much of that stream you caught, Spider, but there was at one point that Twitch chat was spamming about Sigma because of the World Cup leak with the player icon, and Jeff is just like, Sigma, who's that? Of course, there was something after that.
My favorite was he's like Sigma. The chat's asking about Sigma, and he's like, oh, Sigma's a mystery, and by mystery I mean not at all. That it just ends there. So he's like, it's going to be an exciting week for Overwatch. Yeah, we know.
Yeah, we've lived through it, and yes, it was. But anyways, looking at the map pool, we, of course, are sticking with 12 maps. So on Control, we have Ilios, Busan, and Lijiang Tower. Our Assault maps this stage, we have Hanamura, Volskaya Industries, and Temple of Anubis. Hybrid, we have Hollywood, Blizzard World, and Kings Row. And then for Escort, we have Havana, Junkertown, and Route 66. Alright, Spider, looking at this, I'm seeing a lot of Widow maps.
Yes.
Double sniper, let's go.
Yeah, so with the 222 lock, the big question is what compositions are we primarily going to see initially, because teams will undoubtedly fall to, some of the old school base 222 compositions, and then maybe experiment here and there, and definitely some of the lower ranked teams will experiment more out of the gate. But yeah, like double sniper on these maps is going to be very, very strong. So expect to see a lot of double sniper versus bunker type comps. Or bunker versus bunker on Junkertown. I mean, we're going to see the pirate ship come back, because if you thought pirate ship was crazy last year, wait till we start evolving an immortality field into that process. This Junkertown is going to be an absolute shit show this year.
Yeah,
Like that.
get ready for more 7-6 maps.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting going forward. But I do like this, these map picks. Honestly, the ones that stand out to me are the payload maps, because both Havana and Junkertown have the capability to see some really weird compositions. Like double sniper's probably going to be the go-to, but we're going to see some really weird stuff on there. And then you have like good old Route 66, which like rotates what composition is good based on the weather and what point you're on. Like
Oh.
it's 60.
I will
Go
say,
ahead.
though, like with Route 66, we were so accustomed to seeing these quad DPS comps coming out on
Yep.
attack to breeze through that first point, and now we're not going to have that, so I really want to see how that is going to change the success rate of getting that first objective on that map in particular.
Yeah, and a lot of people said going into the 2-2-2 roll lock that we're going to see the return of dive, because a lot of these teams are real well practiced on dive, like say London. But not a lot of these maps are great for dive. Like it will work on certain points and it'll work on certain places, but double snipers much more powerful. And you got to remember that with going into stage 4, they're not going to have the ultimate charge adjustment. We're not going to have that until the playoffs. So we're going to see some grab dragons come back. Like it's going to be very reminiscent of stage 4 last year. Just the little less Brigida, and by a little less I mean no Brigida, because if you're like Brigida, you're not going to see her this stage unless there's some really weird like stall flex picks going on. So
It's only going to be in a comp that has complete self-healing.
Roadhog, Brigida, Hammond, Soldier,
May.
May, Moira.
There you go. That's it. That will not work.
That comp sounds awful. Like just saying that just hurt me in the core. Oh my god. Any of you run that in comp while I'm in the game with you? I'm gonna sit through it, but I'm gonna complain the whole time.
Yeah,
just like those guys were complaining through us winning games earlier. Like, how do you do that, man?
It's very mystery, but I mean, that would be a worse experiment than whatever is going on with Sigma right now. So just don't, guys, please, for all of our sake. But anyways, of course, stage 4 is going to be very interesting. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of experimentation being done, but I want to see how many of these teams are going to fall back to their comfort picks. Like, are we going to see a lot of, like, Widow Junkrat from the Outlaws? Are the, the Titans and the Spitfire going to revert back to dive, because they were both very dominant in that regard? Like, will we see a ton of Hoxel over on the Genji? We have so many cool possibilities with the introduction of 2-2-2. And
Right.
because of that, of course, pick'ems are going to be super interesting, because there's going to be teams that are going to look better. There are going to be teams that have a hard time adjusting to 2-2-2, and, there's probably going to be a handful of teams that are just going to be kind of stagnant with how they currently are, even with the change. So I feel like it's going to be a little all over the place, at least for these first couple of weeks, and it's going to be more of a trial period before anything, but I will note, like, I was looking at the Titans schedule for Stage 4, and it is rough. Like, I don't know if you've seen it, but they have, like, 5 pretty tough games throughout their stage. So who knows where exactly they're going to finish at the end of the season.
So I do have a question for you then. Like, what is your one team that you think will do the best under 2-2-2, and one team that will do the worst under 2-2-2?
See,
and by best I mean, like, if you want to pick the Titans and they're just gonna stay the same, that's still doing good.
Right.
So
I want to see London return to form. I feel like they'll be a lot better in 2-2-2.
Your second Papa,
Um,
or third or fourth? I don't know at this point.
well, yeah, but I'm gonna assume that they're gonna be a lot more consistent compared to the which Spitfire is going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
My only my biggest concern right now, I'm not gonna say dragons. Like dragons are gonna be curious without that like extra DPS. I want to see how much that's going to impact them, but there's a decent chance that it might impact dragons more so than some of these other teams. But I feel like the hunters is kind of like the scapegoat answer because a lot of people don't know how they're gonna do without the wrecking ball compositions and also triple DPS. So it kind of feels like for Chengdu, they're kind of losing that identity for them. If I had to choose one team, though, I'm going to go with the Charge. I feel like the Charge are going to be a team that's going to be, obviously, like, they made some moves. And I feel like with the change and with the experimentation going on, it's going to be a rougher adjustment for them. Just trying to adjust to that on top of these new roster members. So I'm expecting them to be really slow getting out of the gates in Stage 4. I'm not going to say like they're going to be an awful team at it, but I feel like it's going to impact them more so than some of the others just due to that.
Yeah, like well, one of those was my answer, but for like teams that I think are going to do the same or better, I actually think Houston's probably going to do a little bit better. They were already on an upward trajectory, and 222 fits right into their wheelhouse. Like you said, they can run Junkrat or Widow.
So I want to ask you really quick, who do you feel like, and this is Outlaw specific, is going to play the off tank in this situation if we are going to see a ton of Roadhog?
At this point, I don't know. Like I would have to lean into Cool Matt just because he does play a decent diva, and we really haven't seen his Roadhog. So I think that might be an option. We could also see Spree. Like we could see Spree come in and play, because Spree has been known to flex occasionally. Like he's primarily a Zarya player, and that's what he's well known for. So if the Outlaws opt to go with a Widow-based comp, like a sniper-based comp, we could see more Spree than Cool Matt. But right now I'd probably lean on Cool Matt just because that was always their go-to, and he was always like Muma's preferred off tank. So unless something has changed behind the scenes, which you never know with the Outlaws, like Flame could go crazy and just say Dante's our off tank now. Who knows what's going to happen. But yeah, I would lean on Cool Matt initially, unless things go south really quickly. And Jake could play Hog, like Trenchfoot says, that you could always play 3 DPS players and just put Jake on Hog because he has played Hog in the past.
Except
but
Raucus is their best Hog player on that team.
It's true.
It's just not an option.
It is. I mean, it is because they do have Boink and Bonnie still, so they could technically do that. I don't advise that.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal.
No. So, but I think as a whole, like 222, if they get their off tank situation figured out, I think that will, help Houston in the long term. I wanted to say Dallas, like I really did, but I don't know. I'm just not convinced that Dallas has all the inner workings together yet. I think Dallas will get a little bit of a boost because we'll actually get the question of how good is Zachary answered. Because for now they've been like, oh, he's been playing Brig a lot and his Brig has been garbage, but he's a DPS player. And then when he's been on DPS, he hasn't done that well. And they've said, oh, well, he's been playing a lot of Brig, so he's not practiced as DPS. So we'll get that answered. But I think Houston's probably a team that's going to get a decent bump from it. Like, I don't think they're going to get worse from it. And the teams that are going to get worse from it, Hunters is definitely the scapegoat answer. But I think Paris is going to struggle too, because Paris has, when they've attempted to run DPS comps, has not looked good. And they've kind of fallen back on the goats, which still didn't look great. So they're not coming from a great starting point in either side. So unless something serious has changed, I think Paris could see a hit as well. So I'm curious. Like there's a lot of questions I had. Like I mulled over like all the teams this week after it got announced, and I'm like, well, Spark could go either way because Spark was a 3-3 team, and they haven't really seen a lot of DPS, but Spark have really talented DPS players and really talented tank players and really talented support players. They just have to figure it out. So I didn't want to go Spark. Dragons, can they run just 2 DPS is the question. We'll see, but I don't have anything. And London was my go-to for which team I think will get the biggest boost. So next I went to Houston.
Yeah, in regards to Paris, I want to see if they're going to focus more so on Soon's Widowmaker play. I will say, like, when we did see Soon and Shadowburn as a DPS duo, it was definitely did not look good. And in, 3-3, they definitely relied heavily on Danye kind of popping off on the Zarya. So that's a really big question mark for me as well. So outside of that, we also did get an announcement earlier today before the show, which is also coming with Stage 4, and that is the introduction of League Picks, which is another way to earn Overwatch League tokens. So basically, they're running like this beta for this, and it's a way to complete challenges, and then when you complete them, you get like, I'm trying to remember like how many tokens it was. I think it was like 25 Overwatch League tokens. But basically, what you're doing is it's gonna be like kind of like a trivia type thing that's going to it's gonna send you questions about the game that's currently happening, whether it is like map specific or roster specific. We have to wait and see. Basically, it's gonna run throughout all of the matches, beginning on July 25th. Now, to play, all you have to do is go to overwatchleague.com an hour before the live broadcast starts. If you're on Twitch, it will load at the top of the page, and there should also be something there on mobile as well. But basically, you just need to log into your Battle.net account. There's going to be a new tab for you to click on for this, and with each match, you'll have a series of questions for you to make predictions for, and you're able to change or submit your answers up to 2 minutes after the start of each match and map. And we'll have more questions being added for the upcoming matches, added about an hour before the match starts itself. Now, whenever like a new question gets added, you'll have like an alert icon to help notify you whenever that happens. And then each correct answer you have will go towards the completion of these challenges. And of course, you can track your progress. And, as I said, like, if you complete them, you get 25 tokens. So it's just, like, another way for you to get some skins in-game. And, of course, there's a couple other things, like, it's going to run throughout, the season playoffs as well. Even, like, going through the grand finals. They actually have, like, a match schedule tab, where you can, like, set alerts for, like, your calendar, which is going to be nice. So that will work with, like, Google and Yahoo. But when I first saw this initially, I was like, are they doing pick'ems? That was, like, my first thing. I was like, wait a minute. Like, part of that... One of these questions has to be, like, predict the winner. You would have to imagine. So, my initial reaction to this was, like, this is the Overwatch League's way of trying to ease people into fantasy leagues. So, I'm fully expecting at this point, come Season 3, which, again, is coming in 2020, to have an Overwatch League fantasy option, specifically through them. That way we don't have to always rely on outside sources as much as, we love the community involvement, because that's been going on since the inaugural season. So I hope we have more info on that soon, but I'm looking forward to this. I want to see what questions are going to be asked, because that will be a clearer indicator about what direction they have planned.
This is really cool. Nobody expected this. At least I didn't. Like you said, this is the official pick'ems. Like, a match winner has to be at least somewhat a consideration for questions, or at least map winner. They said that questions are going to be posed for specific maps, or like, they could do all kinds of crazy things, like who finishes with the most healing in map 3 and stuff like that. So or which team. Like, I feel like you can't really do specific player questions, because teams can always sub players out and stuff like that. So I think sticking to roles is like a given. Like, who does the like map winner was the videos example exactly. But like, who does the most damage in map 2? Is it Seoul or Dallas? Who And they can even do like end of night things too. Like they can say like predict how many 4-0s there are going to be and stuff like that. Stuff like that. There's so many questions that they can answer just arbitrarily that will raise involvement, and that's all this is there for. This is to raise involvement. So I'm sure they've noticed that Twitch numbers have been lower recently. And that could be through goats, that could be through it's the summer, it could be through, there's hundreds of reasons. It could be that it's a 3-year-old game, who knew? But this is 100% a reason to increase involvement, and league tokens are a great way to do that, because people already say that they just log in and watch the games for tokens, and if that's what you do, that's fine, but it still helps them look like they're getting hundreds of thousands of people to watch it. So at the end of the day, if they can say, well, we have 100,000 people watching and 70% of those people are invested actively answering questions, that's going to look really good to investors, and that's going to look really good to sponsors. So as good as it is on our side from a business standpoint, this is there's no lose here, unless for some reason nobody participates, which isn't going to happen because people love their tokens. So let's pick who's going to win the map and be done with it.
Yeah, I'm really hoping we get some numbers along with this. Like, I want to know how much community involvement there is with this. I want, like, global leaderboards to see who's getting the most predictions right and things like that. And maybe there could be extra incentives based on where you are in the leaderboard. But, that might be more down, the road. It's probably not going to be something that they do immediately. But there's a lot of possibilities that they could kind of tack onto this. And Pick'ems is definitely one of them. So I'm very hopeful for what this is going to mean for the future, and hopefully everyone's going to get into this, and it could, bridge them into other opportunities down the line for the 2020 season. But of course, this week is going to be a pretty hectic week. We got Stage 4 kicking off on Thursday, and I have to say, looking at the schedule, Spider, we have some very intriguing matches, not just because of the 2-2-2 roll lock coming in Stage 4, but on paper, there's some pretty damn good matches. So, like, for example, I'll just list a couple. We have Dragons versus Titans, We'll have, Runaway trying to get their comeuppance against KDP after the Stage 3 playoffs. We have Gladiators Excelsior. Dynasty versus Shock. Fusion Hunters could be pretty interesting with the DPS duos. We have... Let's see, what else? Uprising are another team that has a lot of intrigue with, their recent additions as well, so I want to see how their DPS duo is going to do. But there's a lot of matches that have some pretty big implications for the play-in tournament, and a lot of the focus when it comes to the standings is all going to be built around that throughout this stage, just because, for one, there is no Stage 4 playoffs. It is the play-in tournament, and then we got the season playoffs, but looking at the lineup for this week, what are some of the marquee matches that you're specifically looking at from a viewer's standpoint?
I mean, obviously, Dragons, Titans is going to be a big one. But even Gladiators, Excelsior, I think will be good because it'll give us our first look at, these two, top, I don't want to say top tier, but two previously upper tier teams, and we'll see how they adjust. And then actually, Uprising Guangzhou was one of my other ones to watch, for specifically the reason you said is, and reasons we mentioned earlier, is Guangzhou. I'm curious to see how they fit in their new pieces. And Uprising made some changes too, so I want to see how they shaked out. So there is a lot of good matches this week. Of course, there is the match of the week, which is the Dragons versus Seoul. So we'll see how that goes down. I think we'll get an interesting look out of the Dragons, and we'll see, what Seoul decides to do with their roster questions.
So we have Charge versus the Fusion. Are you expecting Fraggy versus Sato in this one?
I hope so. At this point, why not? That would be such a great story. And, even if Sato came out and just wiped the floor with them, it wouldn't matter at that point. Like it would just be such a fun talking point. It would be something that the whole community would get around. And at this point, Charge, they're still technically vying for a spot in the play-in tournament, so every win helps. But you're gonna win yourself a lot of fans if you can play Fraggy and do decently, if very least, and maybe win, because we don't know what look the Fusion are gonna give. So I hope so. Like I hope that really happens.
Yeah, for the Dynasty this week, I am petrified of this week 1 schedule, because they face the Shock, which is going to be a tough series, and then they face the Dragons on Sunday for the game of the week. I'm not feeling super confident on either side of that. The Shock, they kind of showed their hand with like their DPS look, so to speak, like in the Sage playoffs, when they had brought in they brought in a new main tank to play Orisa. So I don't know how Smurf is going. I'm assuming Smurf is probably going to get the nod in most Orisa situations for the Shock this stage. And the Dragons are a huge question mark. I feel like as long as the Dragons are able to like maintain the amount of peel and support for the backline, they should still be in a pretty good position to have another breakout performance throughout this stage. But I really, really just want to see Fraggy coming out against the Fusion. That's like my primary wish throughout this week. I just want to see that happening. And then outside of that, like for the other Guangzhou Charge game against Boston, then you go back to, Rio and Hotba, or Rio and Bishu, depending on which duel you want to use. But outside of that too, like another game that I would primarily just kind of like roll my eyes at, that I'm actually looking forward to this week, is Toronto Defiant going up against Washington Justice. These are two teams who have definitely had their fair share of struggles. Toronto definitely kind of were free-falling throughout all of Stage 3, and, Washington, they've gone out, they picked up Ellie Vogt and Lola I'll just call him Loli because it's just easier to say. So they picked up, that EU duo who are childhood friends, and I'm assuming Justice are going to come out with that new tank line, and, Defiant themselves still have a relatively new tank duo of their own. So there's a lot of moving pieces on both fronts, and on either side, like, Toronto, they're still in the running, and Washington's pretty much done with, but I would not be surprised if Washington comes out, they perform better throughout this stage, and I'm fully expecting Washington to come out with a 3 or 4 win stage, to probably finish the season with 6 wins, which isn't saying much, but with how much struggles they have had throughout this season, that would definitely be ending their season on a high note.
Yeah, I mean, I had looked at Washington, and I thought to myself, I was like, they could do better in 2-2-2, but it doesn't really matter at this point. And it sucks for me because they're my home team next year. So, I'm like, I hope that, and I said this at the beginning of the season too. Like, I hope all teams do well enough to make most matches competitive, just because the league is much more interesting at that point. Like, you don't like to have a Papega tier. Like, we don't like the traffic light trio. As fun as it is to make fun of them and meme them and stuff, it's much more interesting to say, I don't know who is gonna win this game. Whereas if we're playing against Washington, you're like, oh well, that's a gimme, and stuff like that. So I do expect Washington to do better, but I don't think it's really worth analysis at this point. Like, at this point, it's basically like, can other teams just do good enough to circumvent how much better Washington gets to not throw their place? Like, basically those are trap games. When you go against teams in stage 4, and you're sitting in that 7th through 12th spot. Washington, Florida are huge trap games because both of those teams have potential to do really well under 2-2-2, or at least better. So you have to at least circumvent that. So I'm more interested to see the storylines that develop out of other teams and how they compete against them rather than actually like analyzing Washington. But as somebody who lives near Washington and they will be my home team, I hope they do get better so I can have, at least some amount of enjoyment when I go see them.
Well, I'm sure you still have Corey at the end of the season. Outside of that, I honestly, it's so hard to tell right now. Basically, like, I don't think any spot outside of Corey's is safe on that team when it comes to the off season.
I think the two new tanks are probably going to be safe,
More than
just
likely.
because they picked those up and they're a pretty solid tank duo. So unless they like really flounder and like they're like runaway and not an Overwatch League team, I don't foresee them getting a problem. But yes, I think outside of Corey and the two new tanks, I think that everybody else should be worried.
So I know we have Gladiators versus Excelsior, and like part of me is like, man, I really hope we get to K versus SBB on Tracer, but then like, unless we're going dive, I cannot imagine a situation where we're actually going to get that. I just hope it's not a case of just Bunker versus like double sniper. But if it's double sniper versus double sniper, that should be a pretty interesting match throughout. And London has I don't want to call it a gimme week. I mean, they face a Dallas, and then their second game looks like is against Toronto. Outside of that, though, like there's a lot of DPS potential. Like Fusion versus Hunter is a very intriguing match. I fully expect Fusion to level up into 2-2. My major concern, though, is with the Orisa play on this team. I don't know how well Sato is going to adjust on that front. So that could be a weakness, but we've seen how good Carpe and EQO are when they actually are on their primary roles, but part of me is just thinking, like, these two players have been playing off-role, and they have looked Papega tier in both regards, whether it is on Zarya or in Brig Jail or just Brigbot and whatever you want to call it. They've both been there. So I want to see if that, like, negative mentality is going to transfer over, or if the thought of just actually playing DPS is just going to uplift them enough to return to form. Because you have to think, there's been a lot of people who have been extremely unhappy the past 5+ months, whether it's in a league or just on ladder, being forced to play an off-roll. Like, that has to do something to your psyche at that point. So I want to know how many players that sort of mindset is going to have a negative impact on, and how many are just going to just pick up the ball and just run with it. Because you have to figure there's going to be people that are going to have a rough adjustment even on, like, primary heroes that they haven't played in some time.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to my Zachary talk earlier. Like we see who has kept up in doing their due diligence and who has kind of slacked off and kind of embraced the big jail more than others. But at the end of the day, a lot of these players have still been playing ladder. They've still been playing, DPS player, and they're all good enough to be in the Overwatch League. So I don't expect a whole lot of rust. Really what it's going to come down to, and this is such a shit answer, is it's going to come down to the tanks. It's going to come down to which tanks can create the most space for the team's DPS. And as fun as it is to see DPS players pop off, it's still going to be a stage where tanks are going to have to do the heavy lifting for at least the first part of the stage, because the DPS players are going to have to kind of get back into the swing of things. Because talk about scrim bucks, talk about what you've played on ladder, none of that matters once you get on the stage. Like it took the Valiant 3 stages to start cashing in those scrim bucks. So it's gonna fall to the tanks to make the space. And Alicus says it in chat. Basically what I'm getting at is it's gonna come down to which tanks adapt the fastest, not which DPS adapt the fastest. If the tanks can adapt faster and get out of their old goat habits, or pre-roll lock habits, that's going to make the DPS look much better.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've talked about it, and a good talking point on that is Shroud has actually been playing Overwatch recently. And if you don't know who Shroud is, he is one of the most mechanically gifted first-person shooter players ever. He is, CS god, all of that. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's been playing Overwatch recently, and he placed gold. And since he has placed gold, he has climbed into platinum, and he is at this point rapidly climbing into diamond, and he will soon be much higher than that. Mechanical skill will only get you so far, and in the Overwatch League, the mechanical skill will help, but it's going to be very dependent on how much room they have to work with. So it's going to come 100% down to which tanks adjust the fastest and break their old habits. Like one of the key reasons I didn't mention the shock earlier is because I'm curious to see how Super adapts. Because Super last year coming in, obviously he didn't play in the beginning, but near the end of season 1, he looked mediocre. And that could just be the team, they didn't have enough time to practice. There's a whole bunch of things, but Super did not look like stage 2 or season 2 Super. So I'm curious to see how the shock adapt. Now, I fully believe that they have a very talented coach and a very talented roster, so I don't think they will have a problem, but I wasn't going to start putting money on them or anything yet. Like, I need to see them play under 2-2-2 first.
Mm-hmm. So with that being said, expect a lot of shenanigans throughout these first couple of weeks. I don't really want to dive too much further into it, though, just because we do have a lot of interesting things to talk about in regards to what is to come in the Overwatch League. So not only did we have the 222 announcement, all of the Sigma teases for Hero 31, the PTR update, we also had this pretty lengthy post about the future of the Overwatch League and the plans moving forward for Season 3, which happens next year. So this will move into our main discussion for tonight. So first off, we are going to have what are now we have the Atlantic and the Pacific Division. We're now going to be having conferences. So you have the Atlantic Conference and the Pacific Conference, and then the league is going to divide these conferences into 4 new divisions. So you'll have the Pacific Conference being split into Eastern and Western, with the Atlantic Conference featuring the Northern and Southern divisions. So, Spider, just like I did with H&D this past week, I'm going to list off these divisions one by one. And I want to get your thoughts on the overall strength of the division, and or whether or not there's kind of like an odd man out in this situation. So, starting with the Pacific East, this should come as no surprise. You have a lot of the Chinese teams. You have the Chengdu Hunters, the Guangzhou Charge, Hangzhou Spark, Seoul Dynasty, and the Shanghai Dragons.
I mean, all of those teams sound decent on paper. I mean, the one standout to me currently would be the Charge. They are the lower performing of all those teams, but I think that could be a highly, contested conference or division or whatever they're calling them. I think out of the teams, I'd probably be most worried about the Charge. Maybe Seoul, because they've somehow been bleeding players. Like, they went from having 2 whole teams to being able to field 1-2-2-2 roster almost. So I would expect Seoul to make some pickups in the off season, but I wouldn't worry about them at this point. So the standout to me would be Charge.
Alright, moving into the Pacific West, we have your Dallas Fuel. We have the Los Angeles Gladiators, Los Angeles Valiant, San Francisco Shock, and then the Vancouver Titans.
This is a feels bad man for me, man.
Feels bad,
Dallas,
man.
Yeah, feels bad, man, for real. Like, out of all those teams, I am worried as a Dallas Fuel fan. Like, this is I don't want to say this is the roughest conference, but this is definitely up there. So I really worry for Dallas. Like they're going to need to really step it up in order to compete in this because they're going to be playing these teams a lot, and all of these teams, at least right now, are very very good. So Dallas is unfortunately my standout for us.
Yeah, and I knew when I was talking to a lot of other people out there, some that were Dallas fans and some that were not. Everyone was just kind of like, "Well, Dallas drew the short straw on this one," because
Dallas pulled the Team USA stick in the World Cup.
yeah, basically, to me this was the roughest one from just like a one versus the rest of the division, scenario. I don't think anyone is going to have a harder time than Dallas just due to, the average win rate across the board currently from the Pacific West. So moving to the other conference, we have the Atlantic South. There we have the Atlanta Reign, Florida Mayhem, Houston Outlaws, Philadelphia Fusion, and then your hometown team, the Washington Justice.
This is like the Papega division right here. Like this is and this is going off of season 2. Like we're gonna see a lot of movement in between 2 and 3, and we're starting to see like Florida level up. We're starting to see some things come out of Atlanta. They're still a question mark for me. Washington's making a lot of moves, so I think this in terms of like a division, I think this might be the most closely contested division, even though these teams might end up near the bottom of actual overall skill based on this season. But I think this is a very good contested division. There isn't really a huge standout for me. Like the big thing to me is because Washington and Florida are in the same division, that kind of lowers the whole bracket. So I think this is a pretty solid division overall.
Well, you forgot to mention the fact that we have we have the red, yellow, and green.
Yeah, I mean we have the traffic light trio, but I don't know. I don't look at those teams that way anymore. Outside of maybe Washington at this point, Florida has shown life. Washington, how many weeks have we talked about Washington and I've been on here saying their tank lineup is a problem, is their biggest problem, and they've got a new tank line. Whether or not that immediately fixes problems or not, I don't know, but you have to think that between now and next season, that's going to fix some problems, especially if maybe they keep Sleepy, they start building team synergy. This could be, I wouldn't say this is a championship level team, but this could be a decent team. And I think in this division, this could be a team that picks up a lot of wins, so they look better than they actually are, like the New York Excelsior are currently doing. So, this is as a whole, I'm going to stick with this is probably my closest contested division. Like there isn't a real standout to me right now based off of what we've seen out of these teams.
Yeah, on paper, when I saw the Atlantic South, I was like, whatever the strongest expansion team in the future is going to be, I would fully expect to be in the Atlantic South, just to bring a little bit more attention to it, because I'm not going to say, like, the teams are bad or whatever, but yeah, you're right. Like, I don't think there is a clear standout. Like, Fusion are probably the most consistent team out of the lot, just out of these 5 teams, but, they've also had their fair share of struggles, so we'll see what sort of leveling up or kind of flatlining, so to speak, will happen should, Sato really start to struggle in this current stage. But looking at the Atlantic North, so this is our final division, we have the Boston Uprising, New York Excelsior, Toronto Defiant, London Spitfire, and then the Paris Eternal.
So this is basically London and New York's division to lose. So these two teams are leaps and bounds above the other teams currently. So I would say there isn't one standout, but 3 that we have to worry about. Like I said, this is basically on London and New York to just continue par for the course, and they'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. So outside of the divisions that were listed, we have a lot of changes to the league structure. So for starters, when it comes to the schedule, things are going to look a lot different in 2020 and beyond. So the league is going to be running two separate local events simultaneously throughout the season. So we still don't know any details about like how they're going to kind of like divide the broadcasting talent, what they're going to keep like the like an analyst booth or anything like that. So we're gonna wait to hear more about that. But basically, we have season 3, which is gonna be ran from February going through August, and then they're basically gonna be expanding on the homestands throughout 2020. So basically, we're gonna have each team going to serve as like the host, and each host is going to have a minimum of 2 local weekend events, upwards of 5. Now I know there's already been like a couple of teams announcing like how many events they're going to have. I know Dallas was going to have 5. Guangzhou was going to have a good amount. Washington was at the max as well, but some teams are only going to have 2. And those host teams are going to be responsible for selecting and operating the venues, while the league is going to handle all of the broadcasting. So for season 3, we're going to have 52 homestand weekend events hosted throughout the world. So we're going to have games in, LA. We're going to have games in New York. We'll have some in London. We'll have some over, in South Korea for Seoul. We'll be in China. We'll be all over the globe. And there's other changes outside of that, but how excited are you to kind of see just Overwatch kind of expanded and seeing like the top level competition in these different venues, knowing just the turnouts we're getting, especially in like Guangzhou, just for like the watch parties.
Yeah, I mean this is what we've been building to. This is the hype that we've been trying to generate for 2 years now. This is what we wanted to see, and I am super excited to see them move, to this format. I am a little disappointed that teams won't have like a standard home stadium yet. Like not
Mm-hmm.
every team will have that. Certain teams are absolutely trying to secure that, but it looks like a lot of teams are, gonna move around their respected areas a little bit based on how many they do. Like, and I really like that they gave the teams options. Like they didn't say, you have to host 5 events, you have to host, 3 events. Like they teams that are a little more wary, if they have a fan base in their area, can host less events and kind of test the market. So I think it's a win-win from like investor side of things. And teams that know they have a fan base, like Dallas, Atlanta, stuff like that, it's a win for them too because they're like, whatever, we're going to start raking in the money. We'll take all 5 of them. So I really like that this is the style they're going to, and I think holding 2 at the same time was the right call because it would be hard to get all the games in and scheduling and stuff like this. Whereas now, beginning of the week is travel. You get there, you acclimate, you scrim a little bit, you practice, whatever, and then you go on stage for the weekend, and then repeat. And teams are gonna still play the same number of games, so not every team is gonna have to travel every week. Not every team is gonna have to, play 2 games every week. So I just to me seems like it's really well thought out and exactly what we want to see from home games. So I am, despite my previous comments about Washington Justice, I am super excited for this. This is exactly what we've been waiting for.
Yeah, now instead of having what is essentially 0 opportunities to see them in state, now you'll have 5.
Exactly. Like that's awesome. And not even just that, but where I live, I'm close enough to drive to Philly. Philly is
Mhm.
2 hours away. Like I could go see Philly when they're in the area. There's all kinds of options for a lot of these people outside of Chicago, that you can go see multiple places. So this is really exciting. The only thing I'm curious about is how it's going to work when, like, say both teams are overseas like teams are in China and in London at the same time, so
Mhm.
stuff like that. So there's some logistics that they haven't really ironed out or at least specified yet. But if I don't get to catch all the games live, I'm not super upset about it because being in the US, being in the prime time zones, we've kind of been spoiled over the past couple of years. So it will suck to not catch them live, and it will hurt my viewership because I'm not always going to go back and watch them. I'll go back and watch the highlights or whatever or key games. But I think this is good as a whole because this is just going to grow fans around the world.
Yeah, I do want to circle back to something that Trenchfoot said in our Twitch chat in regards to China. And he's talking about like the censored internet being a big issue for a lot of players who like to stream for extra cash. So in China, basically Twitch is just banned. They focus a lot on oh crap, what is the Twitch equivalent? I'm trying to remember what it was.
I forget.
Is it Billy Billy or Hua? It's
Well,
one
Billy
of...
Billy is the anime streaming service.
Right.
So I don't.
But yeah,
think
I
that's
know I know China kind of has like their own primary streaming service, which obviously not a lot of the players are going to be on. So that's going to be interesting to see how they're going to deal with that. But that could definitely be a deal breaker for some of these players just not wanting to travel in that regard. And just not streaming for a week does lose a lot of money in some regards, and a lot of people just look for someone. Well, they'll just move to another channel essentially. So we'll see if that comes into play. If any players are going to have an issue with that, but like a lot of people are just going to be happy to go back to their home market. There's probably going to be a lot less homesickness for a lot of the players out there just due to the travel. But then again, with as much traveling as they are going to do, that could also lead to a lot of fatigue as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but like you're expecting a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So it'll definitely be interesting to see if like some of the Korean players are just going to primarily, stay back at home whenever they're in their home country. So I don't know. There's definitely some concerns internationally. Due to, what it's going to be streaming on. Like, for Twitch, like, we know there's going to be simultaneous events. Does that mean that you're going to have the option, like, in Command Center to choose between Stream 1 and Stream 2? Are we going to go to, like, two completely different Twitch channel feeds for these games? Are they just going to, like, offline record one and upload it later? We honestly don't know exactly the specifics in that regard. But I don't know quite what to make all of it. All I know is it's going to change the way that everyone is going to be viewing the league, just due to the fact that they are going to try to cater the start times towards whatever that local market is going to be. So, EU's not going to be getting the shaft for a lot of the start times. And like if I want to like watch Seoul in their home market, like let's say they're playing in South Korea. Chances are that match isn't going to start until like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. my time, which means, like I do with the Runaway matches, I'm going to have to catch it on VODs later. So it's going to be a rough adjustment for me and for a couple other people, but not everyone is going to be watching all of the games. And if you're just going to follow like your local teams, it shouldn't really have any sort of impact on you. So keep that in mind. Now, when we're looking at the schedule for 2020, it's important to note that since we are in conferences, the schedule is going to look a little bit different. So you're going to face the teams that are in your conference twice throughout the season. And then outside of your conference, you will face those teams once. And, of course, with the schedule change, we also have what days they're going to be competing changing as well. So all regular season matches are going to be played on the weekends. So I'm assuming that's going to mean Saturday and Sunday only. Potentially Friday might be looped into that, but when I think weekend, it's primarily Saturday and Sunday. So it's probably going to go to
just the 2 days.
Which is going to be pretty interesting as well. So that might free up more streaming opportunities for us on the channel, which would be kind of nice. So we'll try to figure that up. But we're going to have the full schedule out in August. They will have tickets going on sale shortly after that. So probably, I would imagine, in September. But with all of this happening, it's important to note that in 2020, we are no longer going to have stages. So stage playoffs are gone at this point. So, looking at, the current season, Shanghai Dragons are officially, like, the last stage champions that we're going to have in the Overwatch League. And I know that's been a pretty big discussion point for a lot of people. And, at the end of the day, like, if they're trying to kind of mirror what's happening in traditional sports, this is absolutely the right way to go. But there are a lot of things that have happened specifically in the stage playoffs that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So we lose, in some retrospect, some of the storylines that have been organically built in that period. But long term, this is definitely a good direction to go. But it's unfortunate in regards to we don't know what's going to happen with the overall prize pool. So, like, I don't know if that means, like, come season playoffs. Well, I should just say playoffs at this point. That means that more money is going to be up for grabs, whether they're just going to pool everything together for the end of the season, or how that's going to work out. Maybe they'll have, like, all-star bonuses or something like that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they did say that they were open to the idea of, like, a mid-season tournament during all-star time or break or whatever they're going to call it going forward. So I think, dropping the stages is just natural with all the traveling and stuff going on. And I think, going forward, they probably will just pull it at the end, which, kind of stinks for teams like New York last year who didn't win at the end, but won a lot of money along the way. But in general, that's gonna raise the hype for the final tournament, because when you're saying, oh, you're gonna play for $2 million or stuff like that, that's gonna generate a lot of buzz. I'm more curious to see what this does to the patch cycle, because they for 2 years now they're like, we want to keep the patch cycle as close to the main game as possible, and for 2 years now we haven't quite got that. I mean, it's definitely gotten better this year than it was last year, but I think, to me, what this says is they're basically going to go hyper aggressive with it. So we're going to see longer PTR cycles on our side, but at that point they're going to implement it, and then maybe a week or two later implement it into Overwatch League. Like, I would imagine that there's going to be less waiting. So we're not going to be waiting, like the big example last year was obviously the Moth meta, or when they made all those Sombra changes right at the start of a stage, and then we had to watch old Sombra for a whole stage. Like, that isn't going to happen going forward, hopefully. To me, with less clear-cut boundaries, they have less incentive to just, not patch it. So, they're at this point they have less excuses, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. Like, they aren't going to have the old fallback of, we don't want to patch in the middle of a stage, we don't want to do that. Like, it's basically going to come down to, okay, the patch has been on live for a week, put it into Overwatch League. Like, they have to adjust at this point. So that was my big concern. Like, they didn't mention any of that. Beyond that, like, I'm really happy with the way the league is structured overall going forward. Like, it all makes sense logically to me. There wasn't any standouts. We're not going to have any, like, coin flip playoff moments anymore. Like, a lot of that stuff seems to be really well thought out this time. So other than the patches, I think this is a great direction moving forward. I am sad to lose, like, the hype of the stage playoffs, but it's it's a necessary thing to take away moving forward to a home structured league.
Man, that flubbed coin flip was such a meme. And I will quickly note, this is kind of off topic, but, like, during that Seagull stream, I was cracking up so hard when Seagull was about to sign off, when Kaplan had left and he nailed the handshake.
And then Jeff Kaplan stole his phone.
Yeah, that was also true. But Seagull's just like, I gotta call Malik, tell him I made it. We did it, boys.
I made it. We did it. Yeah, that was there's a reason Siegel is like the face of the game, right? He's just such a like likable guy. He's obviously very smart and very good at the game. So I think Siegel was absolutely the right person to do that interview. But yes, I love that whole moment.
Now, I'm glad you did bring up the whole patch cycle, and I will note that there was a leaked conference call from Blizzard around the time of this announcement, and they were expecting these patch cycles to be in 6 to 8 week intervals in 2020.
Yeah, so really to me what that says is we're gonna get less big patches like we're getting now. We will probably get like a big patch every quarter to coincide with a map or a hero or something like that. Whereas we're going to see a lot more balance tweaks. We're going to see a lot more small things. We're going to see a lot more bug fixes come out more rapidly, and they're just going to push them to Overwatch League. So they're going to say, oh, this thing that happened 2 weeks ago that people were like, oh, that was kind of weird. That's not going to happen anymore, or stuff like that. Or if there's like a game, I don't want to say game breaking, but say somebody figures out something that is a creative use of game mechanics, they can patch that out rather quickly now, whereas they don't have to wait between stages. So, I think going forward, I think this is a great direction for the league, and home games were always a big question to us. We were like, how are they going to do travel? How are they going to do that? And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I think logistically, I think this all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so if you guys are worried about, like, kind of like travel time and like how much time off the players are gonna have, since we're not gonna have like official breaks outside of the mid-season points. With the teams playing 2 matches primarily during most of the weekends, it basically leaves the team around 8 to 10 weeks where they don't have active play, whether it's to travel to another area or to recuperate. But they did note that they are looking at the playing tournament again, so that is expected for the playoffs. And we'll see like if they're gonna stay true to the patch cycle. Like they keep saying like they want to push it to live as soon as possible, but I would expect like we'll probably have like another 2 or 3 weeks of additional testing before we see that patch going live to the Overwatch League. So really, outside of that, obviously, like the All Star event's gonna be there. So that would be a week break, and there is talk of doing a tournament there. And I don't know if I would want to go like the magnitude of like the current stage playoff for like the mid-season break. I would prefer to see it just being like the top 2 teams from like the Atlantic Conference and then the Pacific Conference, and then splitting them. Atlantic versus Pacific, basically, for each round, and then doing it, a finals at that point. But outside of that, like, I don't know, like, what else they would look at doing for a playing tournament at that specific point of the season.
Yeah, I think maybe taking the top, 2 or 4 from each, conference or division, you know, would probably be the best way to do it. Like I think you don't want any more than 8 teams because that starts to drag. Um, so I don't know. Like this is something that they haven't even really put a lot of thought into yet. Like this is something they were like, we're open to it. That's a good idea. We're going to talk about it more. So moving forward, I would expect to see something happen just because as fun as the All-Star game is, it's not really super hype, I guess. Like it's fun, but it's not something like we get excited about like stage playoffs or something like that. So I think moving forward we'll see something by time they announce the actual schedule, I'm sure we'll get like we're gonna have a mid-season Atlantic versus Pacific showdown and stuff like that. So the super gauntlet, I guess.
Now, see, the Gauntlet happens in October. That's completely different.
Right. This is the super gauntlet though. It's very different and much more serious because these players are actually getting paid money rather than BlizzBucks.
And also on time.
and on time. Well, we don't know that.
That is true. But
We assume they get. I mean, even if you don't get paid on time, a lot of these players live in a house with like a chef and stuff. So if my paycheck comes 2 days late, whatever, or either way, it's money versus Blizz bucks.
Mhm.
So I can wait for Blizz bucks, I guess, but I can't wait for my paycheck.
yeah, and if they're not getting paid on time, then at least they have a consistent money flow from Twitch. So there's a backup just in case. The first one
those
halts.
top Twitch bit supporters are like putting people and Blizzard's kids through college, man. Some of those Twitch, actually circling back to the weekly picks. That's something they could do. Like they could put us on watch point at the end of the night, be like, hey, Totem really nailed it tonight, and he got all the questions right, and and Spider got all of them wrong, and stuff like that, or do like the top 5 or whatever for most points or something like that. So this is gonna be a fun stage. Like look back 6 weeks ago, go in the way back machine when we were coming into stage 3, and we were like, boy, this stage is gonna be super boring. We're gonna have goats again. It's gonna be Shock versus Titans, and we were super wrong. It was a very exciting stage. And we found out the reason it was a super exciting stage is because teams knew 2-2-2 was coming, and they basically just gave up. So it makes so much more sense now. But this stage, there is none of that. Like this stage, I am super hyped for. Like, and as much as we talked last week about how disappointing it is role queues coming in this late in the season, now that it's actually here and we're looking down the barrel of a role queue stage 4 and playoffs, cool. I'm pumped for it. So like I expected to be kind of disappointed, but whatever. Enough teams have a chance to make it into the playoffs that I think it won't matter at the end of the day. We're just gonna get some good quality clicking on heads.
Yeah, and I look forward to everyone complaining whenever they do patch Sigma in for the season playoffs and just being so confused as to why they would do that.
Yeah. I mean, we could see what Dallas did in stage 4 last year in the playoffs, where we see like freaking Sigma God emerge, or like London did with Prophet. Like Sigma God emerges and just black holes the whole other competition
until there's nothing left.
Until there's nothing left. Until they are just a shadow of themselves.
Absolutely. Let's just hope that they don't kind of like split off into 2, and have that duality going on.
Oh, I'm so excited. Like since we're kind of at the end of the show, I'm gonna go a little off topic, even though it's still Overwatch related. Like we have to get him tomorrow, right? Like at this point he has to be on the PTR tomorrow. So, unfortunately, I had some personal stuff going on, so I had to take off this afternoon. So usually when I hear a release, it's like I cut out a little early from work and start working on our video as an excuse to just play him. But I can't do that tomorrow, so I'm gonna be extra sad. But I am so pumped for this because like the black hole, like the physics, like the maths surrounding Sigma and stuff that people are thinking his abilities will be all sound super fun. And then Doa tweeted out earlier today that he's actually played Sigma, which I'm sure most of these casters and stuff have. And he basically said like Sigma's kit can be used in any situation if you have enough skill, which to me is something tank play severely lacks. Like outside of timing on maybe Hammond and Winston, there's not a whole lot of like mechanical skill involved in tanks. It's more about positioning, game sense, and knowledge. So if there's like a highly mechanically based tank, this could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, my primary thing that I want to see is with his voice lines, to see if they have that duality kind of continue where like you have like his more like human aspects to him as opposed to like his straight like super villain-esque persona, so to speak.
Murder.
Yeah, because there is like kind of like almost a split personality, so to speak. So I want to see if those two are going to clash, just with the interactions as well.
I hope for his alt line, like for friendlies, it plays normally, but for enemies, it plays in reverse. Like that would be such like a cool like alt line, because if you haven't, first of all, if you haven't seen the origin story, go watch it, because it is amazing. I felt really bad because my daughter's been really hyped for like the new hero. She doesn't care who it is. She like really loves when new heroes come out. And then I watched that origin trailer and I'm like, okay, she's 6. I can't really show her that because that's actually kind of scary for a 6-year-old. So I felt really bad that I wouldn't let her watch it. So go watch it. It is phenomenal. But if you play it backwards, he actually talks in the video at certain points if you play the video backwards. So that would feed really well into his voice line. So he, as a whole, like, he is a very intriguing character.
And we're just waiting for more details, which we'll probably get tomorrow. But with that being said, guys, we are going to wrap things up for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best things to do is to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice. We tend to prefer iTunes just because that is our primary podcaster for a lot of people out there. So any sort of feedback or constructive criticism is always welcomed, and that will offer us insight on how we can make for a better listening experience for you guys. And I know we have a new review this week, which was from iTunes, and this is a 5-star review from Sal Sable, who says, really enjoy everyone's personality and personal opinions on Overwatch news. Definitely one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, especially for someone who isn't as engaged in current events. Keep it up. So Sal Sable, thank you so much for taking some time out and leaving us a written review. I know written reviews are few and far between sometimes, and I know a lot of people just like to just, click the stars or whatever and then move on. So anytime we get a written one out, we definitely appreciate that. So thank you so much for tuning in and showing us some support. We greatly appreciate that. Outside of that, guys, if you are looking for more content to consume, there is Overwatch Recall, where you can find our podcast directory for all things Overwatch, whether it's Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro, Fantasy Overwatch League, you name it, it's probably there. And then every Sunday night, we release the Weekly Recall, which has a listing of all the prior week's episodes there on our Twitter at OW Recall. And of course, you can find it linked in our Discord, or on our website at owlnshow.com/weekly recall. And of course, outside of that, if you would like to support the show, you can do so a couple of ways. We do stream pretty regularly all of our shows. So if you are a Twitch Prime member, you can always throw us your Twitch Prime subs, which costs you absolutely nothing. And, if you want to throw money at us, whether it's bits or, subscribing to our channel, that works too. But one of the best things is our Patreon, which we have as well. We have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So if you're looking for something on the cheaper side, or if you want to pledge a little bit more, you can do so. We have tiers between $1 all the way up to $10, and we can you can find more info at patreon.com/OWL network. So since Monday, we do have a new patron in Kasha, or Kesha, depending on how Ed wants to pronounce it. We already went through the myriad of pronunciations and butcherings of her patron's name, so I'm not going to keep doing it, because that's more Ed's thing. But you too can join the likes of our Master and Above patrons, Blazing Bob, Brendan, Josabal, Owl, and Kasha, in helping our network grow. So thank you again so much for all of the continued support that you guys throw our way. Whether it's, just hanging out in Twitch chat, tweeting at us, always hanging out in our Discord. We appreciate everyone looking out and engaging with us, as well as our community across our podcast network. But Spider, of course, we have a number of different ways how our listeners can get a hold of us, so why don't you go ahead and let them know how they can do that?
Sure. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. You can find us on Twitter at @OWLNShow. You can check out our website, where we post all the videos and various other things, including the Weekly Recall, which is www.owlnshow.com. You can check out our YouTube, which will absolutely have a Sigma video as soon as I can get that rolling and actually get to play him. It is www.youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. If you'd like to talk to us directly, you can do so on our Discord. It is discord.me/OWLN show. If you're listening to the audio version, I highly advise you to check out the live shows. You can do so at twitch.tv/OWLN show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so like Totem said, you can send some support our way via Twitch Prime or however else you want. But I would also, if you can't do that, click the follow button because we do have multiple shows all week, so it'll notify you when we go live. Our Monday night show is what you're currently listening to, which is Overwatch League Network. It airs Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific. Tuesdays, we have Owl by the Numbers, which is the fantasy focused show. That is 6 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays is the action-packed Heroes Never Die, which is the variety Overwatch show, which is Totem and Ednar trying to stay on topic for 2 hours. That airs Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific. And then we have various streams throughout the week. So like I said, I typically stream Thursdays. We streamed a little before tonight's show. So hit that follow button so you know when we go live. And you can come check us out and all our shenaneries. And one more time, I guess I'll just throw it out there too. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/OWL network. You can find myself on Twitter at SpiderGD. I've been tweeting out, various thoughts throughout the week on, roll queue and stuff like that. So, if you want to follow me, fine. If you don't, whatever. I don't care.
Well, as for myself, you can find me over on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR, where you can find me, basically just trolling Ed for the most part, and retweeting anything Overwatch related. But with that being said, guys, I do want to thank everyone again for hanging out with us tonight on another episode of Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 89. I have been your host, Totally Drunk, joined, as always, by my co-host, Spider, and we hope to see you guys back tomorrow for our next episode of OWL by the Numbers. Take care, have a good night, and we'll see you soon.